Making a lot of noise lately, a number that could mean an extra $2,400 a year for every single person on Social Security. It's a huge proposal, sparking a ton of hope, but also a pretty fierce debate. So today, we're going to dig in and find out what's really going on.
You've probably seen the headlines, right? The posts on social media, the chatter online, a $2,400 boost to your annual Social Security check. But is this a real possibility we should be paying attention to, or is it just, political noise? Let's try to separate the facts from the fiction here.
Okay, so first things first. Let's talk about the promise itself. We need to break down these numbers that have grabbed everyone's attention and figure out what they could actually mean for millions of American retirees.
So, the big number at the heart of this whole thing is $2,400. That's the proposed annual increase that every Social Security recipient would see in their pocket. And let's be honest, in a time when the cost of everything from gas to groceries seems to be going up, a figure like that, well, it's no wonder it's capturing the public's imagination.
Now, what does a big annual number like that actually mean for your day-to-day life, for your budget? Well, if you break it down, it comes out to an extra $200 every single month. For a lot of folks, that's not just some small bonus. That could be a game changer. That could be the difference needed to cover utility bill, afford prescriptions, or just have a little more breathing room without all that financial stress. It's that monthly figure that makes this proposal feel so real and so appealing.
So where did this idea even come from? It's not just a number somebody pulled out of thin air. It's actually rooted in a formal piece of legislation that's making its way through Washington, D.C. right now. The whole proposal comes from a bill called the Social Security Expansion Act. This is the official legislation that's been introduced in Congress, and its main goal is to make this increase a reality. And that's a really key point. This isn't just a talking point, it's a defined proposal with a very clear objective: boost benefits by $200 a month.
Of course, this immediately brings up the biggest question you can ask with any new spending. Who's going to pay for it? Well, the proposal's answer is to adjust the Social Security payroll tax cap. Right now, there's a ceiling on how much of a person's income gets taxed for Social Security. This act would raise that cap, or maybe even get rid of it altogether. That means high-income earners would end up contributing on a much, much larger portion of their earnings. As you can probably guess, this is one of the most controversial parts of the whole plan.
To really get a feel for the real-world impact, just look at the average person receiving benefits. Right now, their monthly check is around $1,800. With this boost, it would jump up to $2,000. That's about an 11% increase, which is pretty significant. And what this chart doesn't even show is that for people who are on minimum benefits, the impact would be proportionally even bigger. We're talking potentially life-changing.
Okay, so now we have to make a big shift from talking about what the proposal is to whether it could ever actually happen. Because while the idea of an extra $2,400 a year sounds fantastic, its path to becoming law is, to put it mildly, filled with some major political and economic roadblocks.
Yeah, the road to this becoming a law is incredibly steep. First, politically, it's facing just deep divisions in Congress. Fiscally, it runs headfirst into some really serious concerns about the long-term health of the entire Social Security system. And then you've got the logistical side. Potential delays, these really complex questions about fairness between generations, and even unknown ripple effects on other government benefits. It's a lot to tackle.
Let's just break down the debate a little. On one hand, supporters argue, pretty passionately, that this boost is absolutely essential to help seniors keep up with the rising cost of living. They also say, hey, putting more money into the hands of 70 million people, that would be a huge stimulus for the economy. But on the other side, you've got critics raising all sorts of alarms. They're saying it's fiscally irresponsible, and they're worried that injecting billions of dollars into the economy could actually fuel inflation. They also bring up that concern that it puts an unfair financial burden on younger generations who have to foot the bill.
And this brings us to the elephant in the room: sustainability. Here's the thing. Even without this proposed increase, the Social Security Administration's own experts project that its trust fund is on a path to be depleted by 2034. That is a critical piece of context here. So the debate isn't just about whether we can afford a boost right now, but whether adding this massive new expense is even wise when the system's long-term future is already in serious trouble.
It's also really important to manage our expectations about timing. Even in the absolute best-case scenario, the journey from a proposal to an actual payment in your bank account is a long one. A bill gets introduced,
then it faces this lengthy, often really contentious debate in Congress. It would almost certainly be changed and modified through compromises. Only after all of that, maybe, it gets approved. And even then, implementation would probably be phased in over time. The big takeaway here? No one should expect to see an extra $200 in their check anytime soon.
And you know, this quote from the source material really gets to the heart of the matter. This whole conversation we're having about a $2,400 boost is really a symptom of a much larger issue. The Social Security system as a whole is facing a crisis, and it desperately needs reform. The question isn't just about this one proposal, it's about how we're going to ensure the entire system stays solvent for our kids and grandkids.
Okay, so with all this uncertainty floating around, what does any of this mean for your own financial planning? Let's step beyond the headlines for a minute and focus on what you can actually control.
This is such a fundamental point, and it often gets lost in these kinds of debates. It's really worth remembering that when Social Security was first created, it was designed to be one part of a three-legged stool for retirement, right alongside personal savings and pensions. It was never ever meant to be the only source of income for retirees. And keeping that context in mind is absolutely essential for responsible financial planning.
So, here are the actionable steps. What can you do right now? Number 1, stay informed. It's good to know what's being debated in Washington, but please do not base your financial plans on the assumption that this boost is a sure thing. Number 2, and this is the big one, continue your personal savings and investing for retirement. This is the part you have the most control over. And number 3, if you can, talk to a financial advisor who can give you professional advice that's tailored to your specific situation and your goals.
And this final quote really just summarizes the core message for all of us, doesn't it? Relying on political promises is a really risky strategy for something as critical as your retirement. Taking proactive control of your own financial security, that is the most reliable path forward, no matter what happens in D.C.
This whole debate has proven one thing for sure. Millions of seniors are struggling financially. But is another benefit increase the real long-term answer? Or is it just the temporary patch on a system that needs fundamental, deep reform to survive for the next generation? That is the real question for the future of Social Security.
Today, we are really getting into the weeds on the future of supplemental security income, SSI. There are some huge proposals out there that could completely change the game for millions of people. We're talking bigger monthly checks and a massive jump in how much you're allowed to save. But when you peel back all the layers, all these proposals really come down to one single critical question. Is SSI, as it stands today, actually keeping up with the cost of living? This is the core problem we're going to unpack, because for almost 8 million people, the answer to that question really dictates their entire life. So let's just step back for a second. SSI was created, over 50 years ago, and it had a super clear mission: to be a financial safety net. It was designed to fight poverty, and for a while, it did its job. But over the years, a gap started to appear, and that gap has just kept growing, leaving the whole program and the people who rely on it falling further and further behind. Okay, so just to make sure we're all on the same page, what exactly is SSI? It's a really important federal program run by the Social Security Administration that gives a monthly income to adults and kids with disabilities, and also to folks 65 and older who have very little in terms of income and resources. And this right here is the absolute key to its original design. The whole idea from day one was that the payments would keep people right at the federal poverty line. Not way above it, sure, but definitely not below it. It was supposed to be a floor, a baseline of financial stability. And remembering that original goal is so important for understanding where things are today.
So this idea of falling behind, it isn't just a feeling. It's not a hunch that things are getting tougher. It is a measurable, quantifiable gap. And the numbers, they tell a really, really clear story about the difference between the program's original promise and today's reality.
Okay, let's start with the benchmark. For 2025, the official federal poverty line for one person is $15,650 a year. But nobody pays their rent once a year, right? So let's break that down by month. That comes out to $1,304. Remember that number. It's our baseline. Now let's look at what's actually happening for someone on SSI. The absolute maximum federal payment a single person can get in 2025 is $967 a month. That's the ceiling. You can't get a dollar more from the federal government. So right off the bat, you can see those two numbers are not the same. And when you put those two numbers right next to each other, like in this chart, wow, the gap just jumps right out at you. It's not even close. The maximum benefit falls way short of that poverty line, and this difference has just been getting worse year after year. So do the math. The difference is $337. That's the hole people find themselves in every single month. To put it another way, the maximum SSI check is nearly 35% below the very poverty line it was created to meet. That is a massive gap to cover when you're on a fixed income. Okay, so that's the problem. It's a big one. But how do you fix it? Well, there are some pretty concrete plans being floated around. And maybe the biggest one is a piece of legislation called the SSI Restoration Act. It's designed to attack that income shortfall we just talked about head-on. And this proposal is getting a lot of attention. In the source material we looked at, one analyst put it pretty bluntly, saying, the SSI Restoration Act, in my opinion, is a really, really good one. It checks literally all the boxes. So it's seen as this complete fix, not just some tiny little patch. So what are these boxes that it checks? Well, first and foremost, the Act wants to raise monthly benefits to 100% of the federal poverty line. That means, boom, an instant $337 a month raise for someone getting the max benefit. And this part is crucial. It would then tie or index those benefits so they automatically go up with the poverty line every year. That way, this gap can never open up again. The Act also tackles the marriage penalty, which can hurt married couples. And it wants to seriously raise those ancient asset limits, which we're going to talk about next. Okay, reality check time. This is really, really important to understand. The SSI Restoration Act is still just a proposal. Right now, it has not been passed by Congress. It's been introduced, it's being talked about, but it is not the law of the land. But, you know, a bigger check is only half the story. There's another huge problem that's kind of baked into the system right now, and it has everything to do with saving money. Okay, so the asset limits for SSI, that's how much money you can have saved up, are stuck in a time warp. They haven't been updated in decades. Right now, the limit for one person is just $2,000. I mean, think about that. Your car breaks down, your fridge dies, you have one unexpected medical bill, that can wipe you out completely. It basically makes it impossible to build any kind of real safety net. So the proposed fix for this is, well, it's dramatic. The asset limit for an individual would jump from $2,000 all the way up to $10,000. And for a couple, it would go from $3,000 to $20,000. I mean, that is a night and day difference. Let's just pause on that individual number for a second. Going from $2,000 to $10,000, that's a 500% increase. We are not talking about a small tweak here. This is a massive shift in policy, basically admitting that the financial world of today is nothing like it was when these old limits were set. And what does that really mean for someone's life? It's not just about the numbers. It's about security. It's about having that peace of mind that comes from knowing you have a rainy day fund. It means you could actually save for an emergency without that constant fear of losing the very benefits you need to survive. Okay, so we've got these two huge ideas on the table, one to boost monthly income and one to raise the savings limit. But what does it all mean? You know, how does a plan like this go from being an idea to being a reality? Well, it all comes down to the process in Washington. First, lawmakers have to introduce the bills, which, yep, they've already done. After that, the bills have to get debated in committees and then eventually get voted on by both the House and the Senate. If, and that's a big if, a bill passes, then it goes to the Social Security Administration to actually put the changes into effect. But it's key to remember where we are right now. These are all still just proposals on paper. All right, so let's just do a quick recap of the whole shebang. We're talking about 4 big things. 1, bigger checks, with that $337 monthly boost to get up to the poverty line. 2, higher savings with that 500% jump in the asset limit. 3, fairer rules, getting rid of that penalty for married couples. And 4, future-proofing the system by tying benefits to the poverty line so this whole mess never happens again. When you step back and look at it, these proposals are really a total rethinking of what SSI is and what it does. They're trying to bring it back to its original promise of being a real anti-poverty safety net. But the million-dollar question remains, is there enough political will to make these big plans a new reality for the millions of Americans who rely on it? And that's what we'll all be watching.
Today, we're jumping right into some huge proposals that are sitting in Congress as we speak. We're not talking about theories. These are actual bills that could put hundreds or even thousands of extra dollars directly into your pocket each year. So we're going to break down the exact numbers, go through all the different plans, and really dig into what this financial boost could look like for you.
You know, this is something so many seniors feel. It's the sense that you've worked your entire life, you've done everything right, and now, in retirement, you just can't seem to get ahead. It feels like you're constantly running just to stand still. Well, today we're going to look at why that is. And more importantly, we're going to explore some real, tangible solutions on the table that could change that.
And that feeling of running backwards, it's not just in your head. For millions of people, it's a cold, hard financial reality. And it's all driven by this gap that just seems to get wider and wider every year. The gap between what you get in your annual benefit increase and how much your everyday costs are going up. Let's actually break down the numbers.
All right, so let's take a look at the most recent cost of living adjustment, or COLA. It was 2.5%. Okay, a little bump up. But at the exact same time, the Medicare Part B premium, something pretty much everyone has to pay, jumped up by 6.6%. So you've got one hand giving you a 2.5% raise, but the other hand is taking out 6.6% more for something you absolutely have to have. You can see how that raise disappears pretty fast.
And that right there, that imbalance is the whole problem. When your biggest and most essential costs are climbing way faster than your income, any raise you get is just gone in a flash. For a lot of people, that little bump in their Social Security check was completely eaten up by the higher Medicare premium, which means they literally ended up with less money in their pocket than before they got the raise. They actually moved backwards.
And look, this isn't just a bad year here or there. This has been happening for a long time. Over the last decade, this exact same situation, where costs just keep outpacing the adjustments, it is eaten away, literally eroded about 20% of your Social Security check's buying power. The dollar you got 10 years ago just doesn't go as far today. Not even close.
So you might be wondering, haven't there been bills to help with this? Well, yes, but let's look at what actually happened. Not long ago, a major bill was passed that promised financial relief, but when you peel back the layers, you see it created a kind of tale of two different worlds for seniors. Okay, so this bill had some huge benefits in it. We're talking a $6,000 annual tax deduction, a massive change to the inheritance tax that lets people pass on up to $15 million tax-free, and a big deduction for state and local taxes. These are all significant financial benefits, for sure. But the real question is, who did they actually help?
But here's the catch. The whole thing was built around tax deductions, and it turns out a massive 40% of seniors, well, they don't file taxes on their benefits because their income is below the threshold. So if you don't file taxes, what good is a tax deduction? It's worthless. For 40% of seniors, this big bill meant absolutely nothing. Zero.
So if that didn't work for everybody, what's the alternative? How do you get real money directly into people's hands? Well, let's dive into the first major proposal on the table. And this isn't some complicated tax credit. It's a plan designed for a simple, universal, and immediate increase for every single person who relies on Social Security.
This isn't some pie-in-the-sky idea. It's an actual bill, the Social Security Expansion Act, and it's sitting in Congress right now. It could be passed. And its purpose is really clear. Help seniors and other beneficiaries finally catch up with the rising costs that have been chipping away at their income for years.
And the core of it is incredibly simple and direct. It would provide a $200 a month boost across the board. And when I say everyone, I mean everyone. This is for retirees, people on disability, those on spousal benefits, and survivor benefits. Everybody gets the increase.
Now this is where you can really see the difference it would make. Think about it. The average COLA might give you an extra, what, 40 or 50 bucks a month? This proposal is a flat $200. Annually, that's the difference between maybe an extra $500 and a whopping $2,400. That is a game changer. That $2,400 a year could cover property taxes or prescriptions or just finally give you some breathing room.
Okay, so that first plan is a universal boost for everyone. But there's another proposal that takes a different tack. It hones in on the folks who are struggling the most, aiming to provide a real life-altering lifeline for millions of seniors who are living on the absolute minimum.
It's called the Social Security 2100 Act. And just like the last one, it's a real bill waiting for action in Congress. This one specifically focuses on the 30% of beneficiaries who are getting by on the minimum benefit, folks who are maybe trying to make ends meet on about $900 a month. I mean, it's a constant struggle just to keep your head above water.
So get ready for this number. For this group, the proposed increase is a massive $660 every single month. And this isn't a temporary fix or a one-time check. It's a permanent boost to their income designed to completely change their financial situation for the better.
Just look at the change here. Someone trying to survive on $900 a month would see their income jump to over $1,500. But more than just the number, this change would lift them completely out of poverty, up to 125% of the federal poverty level. That doesn't just help, it provides real stability and a chance to breathe, maybe for the first time in a long time.
Okay, remember how we started this talking about that feeling of running backwards? Well, there's another proposal designed to stop that from ever happening again. It fixes the COLA itself by creating a minimum floor, a safety net, so you know you'll get a meaningful adjustment every single year. No more guessing. This chart shows you exactly what that means. So last year, the COLA was 3.2%. This year, it's 2.5%. With this new floor, your increase would never be less than 3.5%. If inflation is higher, great, you get the higher number. But you're always protected on the downside. It ensures your benefits actually keep up with costs, protecting your buying power year after year.
All right, finally, let's talk about fixing some of the fine print in other essential programs that just drives people crazy. These are common sense changes to rules that often feel like they're designed to make things harder, not easier. Let's start with food assistance.
So let's start with food stamps. And this is a really shocking fact. There are about 5 million seniors who are eligible for this help, but don't even bother applying. And why not? Because after all the paperwork and all the hassle, the minimum amount they get is so small, they just figure it's not worth the effort.
I mean, can you believe it? Right now, the minimum benefit can be as low as $23 a month. The proposal here is simple. Raise that minimum to a much more helpful $75 a month. That way, anyone who goes through the process and qualifies is guaranteed to get a level of support that actually makes a real difference at the grocery store.
Okay, here's another one that just seems backwards. It's a rule that can actually disqualify you from getting help if you've done the responsible thing and saved a little money for an emergency. It feels like you're being punished for planning ahead.
Right now, if you have around $4,500 in savings, money you've set aside for a car repair or a medical bill, you can be denied help. This proposal would raise that limit to $10,000. So instead of being penalized for being responsible, it means you can have a safety net and still get the help you need with groceries.
And last but not least, we have to talk about healthcare costs, which can just be crushing. There's a big push to expand Medicaid, which, for about 30% of seniors, is the program that makes Medicare truly affordable. It helps pay for all those things Medicare doesn't fully cover. You know, the Part B premiums, deductibles, prescriptions, even critical things like dental, vision, and hearing. Expanding it means more people could get that help.
So at the end of the day, the most important thing to remember is that these aren't just ideas being tossed around. The Social Security Expansion Act, the 2100 Act, all these common sense fixes, they are active bills that could be passed to totally reshape retirement security. They represent a real shift from just barely getting by to actually having some stability. So the real question for all of us is, what comes next? Today, we are diving deep into a really critical conversation that's happening right now about the financial health of millions of American seniors. With costs going through the roof and benefits just not keeping up, there are two major ideas on the table. One is a one-time stimulus-style payment for some quick relief. The other, a permanent change to how Social Security benefits are calculated for long-term stability. Let's get into it.
I want to start with just one number. Look at this, 5 million. It's a massive figure, and honestly, it represents a very real and growing crisis that we just can't ignore.
So, what does 5 million mean? Well, that's the estimated number of seniors whose Social Security checks will fall below the poverty line by next year. This isn't some far-off problem, it's right around the corner. And it's a financial reality that is sparking a huge conversation all across the country about how we can provide some real, meaningful support.
All right, so here's our roadmap for this explainer. First, we're going to break down the financial squeeze that so many seniors are feeling. Then, we'll dig into why the system that's supposed to help, that annual cost of living adjustment, or COLA, is actually falling short. From there, we'll look at the two big solutions being proposed,
a one-time payment versus a permanent fix. And finally, we'll see where this whole debate is headed.
Okay, let's get to the heart of the problem, this day-to-day financial squeeze. For millions of retirees, that Social Security check was supposed to be a rock of stability. But now it feels like it's shrinking every month, even if the number on the check is the same. It's creating this intense, constant financial pressure.
You know, this quote from the Senior Citizens League really hits the nail on the head. A sharp erosion in their purchasing power. What does that actually mean? It means the money you have just doesn't go as far. The same $100 bill that used to cover a week of groceries now barely covers a few days. That gap between income and the actual cost of living is just getting wider and wider.
And look, this isn't some abstract economic theory. It has real-world consequences. We're talking about seniors having to choose between paying their rent and buying medicine. We're talking about falling behind on home payments or stressing about the utility bill. And a huge piece of this puzzle, as the source material points out, is the sky-high cost of healthcare. Some seniors are shelling out over $1,000 a month out of pocket, even with Medicare.
So, you might be thinking, wait a minute, isn't there a system for this? Don't they adjust benefits for inflation every year? And the answer is yes, they do. But a huge part of the problem is how they calculate that adjustment. It's called the Cost of Living Adjustment, or COLA. On paper, it's a fantastic idea. Every year, benefits get a bump to help people keep pace with rising prices. Sounds perfect, right? Well, in practice, there's a fundamental flaw in the machine.
And this, right here, this is the core of the issue. The current COLA is based on something called the CPIW. It tracks the spending habits of younger, working-age people. But think about it. The budget of a 35-year-old is completely different from a 75-year-old's, right? The current formula barely accounts for seniors' biggest expenses, especially healthcare. The proposed fix is to switch to the CPIE, an index designed specifically for the elderly. It would actually track what seniors spend their money on, which could lead to much more realistic benefit increases.
And here's what that flawed calculation looks like in the real world. This year's 2.5% COLI increase? For a lot of people, it was completely eaten up by the jump in Medicare Part B premiums. So, the Social Security check got a little bigger, but another key expense grew right along with it. The end result? Zero actual increase in their spending power. They were left standing in the exact same spot.
Okay, so since the current system clearly isn't cutting it, advocates are pushing for solutions. And the first major proposal is all about immediate impact, a one-time catch-up payment. Think of it like a targeted stimulus check just for Social Security recipients.
The number that keeps coming up, the one recommended most often by analysts and experts, is $1,400. This is seen as a big enough payment to provide some real, immediate breathing room for folks who've fallen behind on bills or need to cover a major expense.
Now, while the idea of a one-time check is gaining a lot of steam, the exact amount is still being debated. Some point back to a $250 payment made in 2009, but with today's costs, many experts are saying that's just not enough. They're pushing for a much more significant figure, like that $1,400 we just saw, or even as high as $2,000 to really make a meaningful difference. The Senior Citizens League is a major voice behind this idea. They call it a make-up payment, and that framing is really important. They're basically saying, listen, for years the COLA has shortchanged seniors. This payment isn't a handout. It's about making up for that lost ground. It's all about providing a financial lifeline right now.
But, you know, a one-time payment is kind of like a bandage. It helps right away, but it doesn't fix the underlying problem. And that brings us to the second major proposal, a permanent, structural fix to the COLA formula itself.
And the support for this idea among the people it would actually affect is, well, it's absolutely overwhelming. A survey found that 96% of Social Security beneficiaries want to switch to the CPIE. That's not just a majority, that's a nearly unanimous call for a real systemic change.
So, how would this actually work? Well, first, Congress would have to pass a law to officially adopt the CPIE. Right away, that new formula would start tracking the costs that seniors really face, like housing and out-of-pocket medical expenses. Since those costs tend to rise faster, the annual COLA would almost certainly be higher. This would mean that monthly checks wouldn't just get a tiny bump, they'd grow in a meaningful way year after year.
And let's be clear, this is not a small tweak. According to analysts, switching to the CPIE could boost monthly benefits by an estimated $200 to $500 every single month. Let's make that real. If your current benefit is, say, $1,500 a month, this change could potentially push it to $1,700 or even $2,000. That's not a one-time check. That's a permanent raise to your monthly income, forever.
So we're at a crossroads, right? We have two very different approaches on the table. One is like a rapid infusion of cash to deal with the crisis we're in right now. The other is a deep structural reform designed to prevent this crisis from ever happening again.
Let's break it down side by side. The one-time stimulus is all about immediate help, a big chunk of cash to help people who are drowning in bills today. The permanent COLA fix is about long-term security, a smaller but consistent monthly boost that ensures people's benefits actually keep up with their costs in the future. It's a classic debate. Do you solve the urgent problem of the present, or do you secure the future?
And this isn't just talk. This debate has real political momentum. You have lawmakers from both sides of the aisle, people like Bernie Sanders and Bill Cassidy, all pushing for some kind of benefit increase. That bipartisan interest tells you just how urgent and widespread this problem has become.
Which brings us to the one central question this entire debate rests on. What do seniors need most right now? Is it the immediate urgent relief of a one-time payment to help them catch up, or is it the lasting security of a permanent structural fix? That's the choice facing policymakers, and the decision they make will impact millions of lives for years to come.
So if you're getting Social Security retirement or SSDI benefits, and you're thinking about working, there are three numbers for 2025 that you've got to have on your radar: $1,620, $1,950, and $2,700. These are the official earnings limits, and if you go over them, it can directly affect your monthly payments. So let's break down exactly what they mean for you.
You know, with the cost of living what it is, it makes total sense that a lot of people are thinking about working to bring in a little extra cash. But whether you're looking at a part-time gig or maybe starting a side hustle, it is so important to understand how that extra income can play with your benefits.
And look, this isn't a small detail you can just brush over. The Social Security Administration has really specific thresholds for earnings. If you cross those lines, you could see your benefits get cut or even get a letter saying you don't qualify anymore. We're going to make sure you have all the info you need to avoid that headache.
All right, so here's our game plan. We'll kick things off by talking about who these rules actually affect. Then, we're going to dive deep into the specific limits for SSDI and for folks who retire early, and that includes the special higher limit for blind beneficiaries. After that, we'll get into what actually happens if you go over the limit, and we'll wrap it all up with the key things you need to remember. Okay, first things first, let's get crystal clear on who needs to be paying attention to these earnings limits. And hey, even if you're not working right now, you'll want to stick around. This is the kind of info that's good to have in your back pocket just in case.
So, to be 100% clear, the 2025 limits we're talking about today are for people getting Social Security retirement benefits or Social Security Disability Insurance, that's SSDI. Now, if you're an SSI or Supplemental Security Income beneficiary, these specific rules do not apply to you. SSI has its own totally separate set of rules for income. Trust me, ignoring these numbers is a risk you just don't want to take. The consequences aren't just a little slap on the wrist. They can have a huge impact on your finances and honestly, cause a ton of stress if you're not ready for it.
So, what are we really talking about here? What's at stake? Well, you could see a huge chunk taken out of your monthly check, you could get that dreaded overpayment letter in the mail asking for money back, or, in a worst-case scenario, you could be told you don't qualify for benefits at all anymore.
All right, let's get right to our first magic number. This one is the 2025 earnings limit for non-blind SSDI beneficiaries, and this applies to the vast majority of people who are receiving disability benefits.
So here it is. The number to remember is $1,620 a month. If you're a non-blind SSDI beneficiary, that's your ceiling. It's the absolute max you can make in gross earned income before you start to put your benefits at risk.
Now, this is a super important detail, and it's where a lot of people get tripped up. This limit applies to your gross income. That's the total amount you earn before they take out taxes or anything else, not what actually hits your bank account. So it doesn't matter if it's from a regular paycheck or a side hustle, it's that top line number that counts.
When you earn more than that $1,620 limit, the Social Security Administration has a name for it: Substantial Gainful Activity, or SGA. If you're consistently hitting that SGA level, it can trigger a review of your case. Basically, the SSA might see it as a sign that you're able to work. This is a bit different from the trial work period, which has its own thing going on. But for ongoing work, SGA is the term to know.
Okay, let's switch gears for a minute and talk about the rules for Social Security retirement beneficiaries. This is a whole different set of rules, and it's often called the earnings test. It's really aimed at people who decided to start taking their retirement benefits early.
So this earnings test is specifically for you if you're getting retirement benefits, you're younger than your full retirement age, and you will not hit that age at any point during 2025. If you haven't started your benefits yet, then you don't need to worry about this. For this group, the limit for 2025 is a little higher. It's $1,950 a month. Now that number comes from an annual limit of $23,400. And while the SSA ultimately looks at your yearly total, thinking about it as $1,950 a month is the perfect guide for your gross income.
Now, they call it the earnings test, but it's not really a test you can pass or fail. A better way to think about it is like a tripwire. If you stay below it, your benefits are totally fine. But the moment you go above it, that's when the reductions kick in.
Okay, time for our third and final earnings limit. This one is different. It's a higher limit specifically for SSDI beneficiaries who the SSA classifies as legally blind.
For SSDI beneficiaries who are blind, that gross monthly earned income limit for 2025 is significantly higher. We're talking $2,700 a month. And just like with the other SSDI limit, earning over this $2,700 threshold is, you guessed it, considered substantial gainful activity. The potential outcome is exactly the same. The SSA may take a closer look at your case to figure out if you still qualify for disability benefits.
So we've gone through the three main limits. But what's the real story? What actually happens if you make more than that? This is where a lot of confusion comes in because the outcome is totally different depending on whether you're on retirement benefits or disability benefits. Let's break it all down.
For all you retirement beneficiaries, the consequence is a very specific formula. The SSA looks at your total earnings for the whole year. Then, for every $2 you earn above that annual limit of $23,400, they will temporarily hold back $1 from your benefits.
Let's put some real numbers on this to make it super clear. Let's say your total earnings for the year are $24,400. Okay, that's exactly $1,000 over the limit. So you apply the rule, $1 held back for every $2 over. And boom, the SSA would withhold $500 from your benefits. You can see how important it is to plan ahead.
But here's the kicker, and this is so important to remember. That money they withhold, it's not gone forever. Once you hit your full retirement age, the SSA recalculates everything, and they give you credit for any of those months where money was held back. This actually leads to a slightly higher monthly payment for the rest of your life. So it's really less of a penalty and more like you're just pushing that money down the road to get it later.
Okay, we have covered a lot of specific numbers and rules here. So let's take a second and boil it all down into the most important takeaways so you can plan out your year without any stress.
Think of this table as your ultimate cheat sheet. Everything is right there, side by side. You can see the monthly limit for each type of beneficiary and what happens if you go over. This is a great thing to screenshot or just keep handy for reference.
Really, the most important thing to take away from all this is to just be proactive. Make sure you know which of these limits applies to you, track that gross monthly income like a hawk, and if you have any questions, any doubt at all, just call the Social Security Administration. It is always, always better to ask for help beforehand than to get a nasty overpayment notice in the mail later on. At the end of the day, knowing these rules is all about empowerment. It gives you the power to make smart financial choices without guessing. So whether you decide to work right up to that limit, or maybe you decide working isn't for you right now, you can plan your year with confidence and, most importantly, avoid any of those unwelcome surprises.
So, have you been seeing all those headlines buzzing about new stimulus checks for 2025? If you have, you're not alone, and yeah, it's pretty confusing. Are millions of us about to get more money or not? The answer? Well, it's not a simple yes or no. In this explainer, we're going to cut through all that noise and give you the real story. Let's just get right to it. The big question on everyone's mind. Are new stimulus checks actually coming in 2025? Well, the short answer is, it's complicated. You see, the headlines you're reading are actually blending two totally different stories. One is a nationwide proposal that's, well, it's far from a done deal, and the other is a confirmed payment, but only for people living in one specific state. So, to make this all make sense, here's how we're going to break it down. First up, we'll untangle all this news and separate these two different payments. Then we're going to do a deep dive into that proposed federal payment. After that, we'll look at the major hurdles and the public debate that's swirling around it. Then we'll switch gears and talk about New York's confirmed refund. And finally, we'll wrap it all up with what this actually means for you. All right, let's dive in. The absolute most important thing to get your head around is that we're talking about two completely different things here. A potential plan for the whole country and a definite payment for one state. To really understand what's going on, we have to look at them separately. Okay, so here it is, the heart of all the confusion, laid out side by side. On one hand, you've got this proposed federal tariff rebate. That's a nationwide idea, but key word there, it is not law yet. On the other hand, we have the New York State refund. This one is confirmed and approved, but it's only for New Yorkers. Let's start by unpacking that nationwide proposal first. So let's zoom in on the one that's really grabbing all the headlines, the proposed federal payment. This is the one that could, in theory, reach low and middle income folks all across the country. But as you're about to see, a whole lot has to happen before that becomes reality. So where did this idea even come from? Well, it was floated by former President Trump, and he called them tariff rebate checks. The whole concept is to take the money that the government makes from tariffs, those taxes on goods brought in from other countries, and then give that money directly back to low and middle income Americans. It's basically a form of economic stimulus. Of course, the big question is, who would actually get this money? It's not for everyone. The proposal has some really specific income rules to figure out who would qualify. So let's break down exactly what those numbers are. So for a single person, the magic number is $75,000 a year. If you make that much or less, you'd qualify. And this is a really important point. This would include people who are on Social Security or other federal benefits, as long as their total income stays below that $75,000 line. And if you do fall under that income cap, the proposal says you'd get a one-time check for $600. Pretty straightforward payment for those who meet the criteria. Now, what about married couples who file their taxes together? Well, the math is pretty easy here. You just double it. The income limit would jump to a combined $150,000, and a qualifying couple who meets that income level would get a payment of $1,200, again, if this plan actually becomes law. But wait, there's a little more to it. The proposal, which was put together by Senator Josh Hawley, doesn't just stop with adults. It also includes an extra $600 for every child. So think about it. A qualifying family of 4 could actually see a payment of $2,400. The plan also mentions a phase-out, so the payments would gradually get smaller for people who earn a little bit over the limits. Okay, this next part is so important, and it's what a lot of the headlines are just skipping over. This is all just a proposal. I have to say it again, it is absolutely not guaranteed money. This plan has to go on a really long journey through Washington before it could ever become a reality, and it's already sparking a ton of debate. And, that journey to becoming a law is a tough one. Any bill like this has to clear 3 huge hurdles. First, it has to be debated in Congress. Then, it has to be passed by a vote in both the House and the Senate. And only then, if it makes it that far, can it be signed into law by the president. It's a really difficult path with no guarantee of success. And even while it's on that journey, it's already facing a lot of criticism. We're hearing from a lot of economic analysts and experts who are looking at this plan and, well, they're basically saying, you know what, $600 just isn't enough these days to really help. And to really see why they're saying that, you just have to look at this comparison. A lot of us remember those much bigger stimulus checks we got during the pandemic, right? Some were as high as $2,000. When you put this proposed $600 rebate next to that, well, you can see why some folks feel it falls a little short. The big reason for this whole argument, it all comes down to one word: inflation. I mean, with the cost of everything from groceries to gas going up, we're all feeling the pinch. For some context, a recent report showed prices went up 2.7% in just a single month. So you can see why a lot of people are arguing that for any relief to have a real impact, it just needs to be bigger. Okay, so let's switch gears completely. We've been talking about a proposal, something that might happen. Now let's look at something that is happening, but in a very different place. Yeah, this isn't a maybe or a what if. This is real. Governor Kathy Hochul in New York has officially announced that about 8 million people in the state are getting a stimulus refund check. It's approved, it's funded, it's on its way. So here are the hard facts for New York. The status? Confirmed. Done deal. The amount is going to be somewhere between $200 and $400. Now, the whole point is just to give folks a little bit of a cushion against that high cost of living. Is it going to change your life? Probably not. But could it help with groceries for a week or two? Absolutely. And for millions, that's real, tangible help. All right, so we've looked at the big national what if and the very real New York payment. So what's the bottom line for you? Let's boil this all down to the key takeaways you really need to remember when you see these stories pop up. Okay, here's what you need to remember. First, that federal check for $600 to $1,200, it's just a proposal right now. Nothing is set in stone. Second, that $200 to $400 check in New York, that is confirmed, but, and this is a big but, it is only for New York residents. For either one of these, your eligibility comes down to your income and your location. And finally, don't forget that national plan has a huge mountain to climb politically.
And this whole thing really leaves us with a much bigger question, one that's at the very heart of this national conversation. In an economy where costs keep rising for everybody, what is the right amount of economic relief? Is a smaller, more targeted payment the way to go? Or do people need something more substantial to really help them stay afloat? It's a tough question, there's no easy answer, and you can bet we'll be hearing a lot more about it.
You've probably been hearing the whispers, the chatter about another potential stimulus check. Well, guess what? It's not just talk anymore. A brand new proposal is officially on the table, and it's for a $600 payment to millions of Americans. So let's get right into it and break down exactly what this so-called tariff rebate is, where the cash would come from, and, the big question, how likely is it to actually land in your bank account?
So let's cut to the chase. The headline news is this. Senator Josh Hawley, with a public thumbs up from President Trump, has introduced a new plan for a $600 tariff rebate check. Now that's the starting number, but as you'll see in a minute, some families could actually get quite a bit more. This is really the first serious proposal for direct payments that we've seen in a while, and believe me, it has a lot of people talking. But you gotta ask, right? Why now? I mean, it's 2025. Well, the answer really comes down to the immense economic pressure that so many Americans are still feeling every single day. Let's take a closer look at the numbers that are really driving this whole conversation. All right, so check out the latest inflation numbers. After sitting at about 2.5% for 2024, the annual rate just ticked up to 2.7% this past June. Now, I know what you might be thinking. 2.7%? That doesn't exactly sound like a crisis. But it's the story behind the number that really matters. It's this upward trend that people are absolutely feeling in their wallets. And this right here, this is where you can see that huge disconnect between the official numbers and real life. A recent Gallup report found that grocery prices have skyrocketed by a staggering 21%. Now compare that to the annual cost of living adjustment. That's the COLA increase that folks on Social Security, SSI, or VA benefits got. Their increase was just 2.5%. Think about that. When the price of your food goes up by 21%, but your income only goes up by 2.5%, that is a serious, serious financial squeeze.
This quote just hits the nail on the head, doesn't it? It perfectly captures that feeling that the data on paper doesn't always reflect the reality of what families are actually going through. It's this gap, this huge chasm between the government's official stats and the crushing reality of rising costs that's really fueling this whole call for more relief.
Okay, so the multi-billion-dollar question is, where would the money for these checks actually come from? Well, the plan is to fund them using revenue from something called reciprocal tariffs. In simple terms, these are just taxes that the U.S. government puts on goods being imported from other countries. According to President Trump, the U.S. is pulling in billions and billions from these tariffs, and he's basically said, hey, this is the perfect time to turn that money around and give it back to low and middle income Americans.
All right, so we've covered the why. Now let's dive into the how. What are the nitty-gritty details of this tariff rebate plan? Who exactly would get a check, and how much could they expect?
Here's how it's all supposed to break down. If you're a single adult making less than $75,000 a year, you'd get the full $600. For a couple filing their taxes together and making under $150,000, that payment doubles to $1,200. And here's where it gets really interesting for families. Each qualifying child would also get a payment. That means a family of 4, under that same $150,000 income level, could see up to $2,400. Now, if you earn over the limit, the payment gets reduced by 5%. It's pretty clear this is aimed squarely at helping low and middle-income households.
The plan also answers a really important question. What about people who might not have a formal income on paper? Well, it creates specific exemptions. Seniors, people with disabilities, and full-time caregivers wouldn't be subject to those income limits. This is a huge deal because it helps make sure some of the most vulnerable groups get the full payment, no strings attached.
Okay, let's pump the brakes for just a second. It is absolutely crucial to remember that for now, this is just a proposal. It was actually introduced super quickly after President Trump first mentioned the idea, which kind of surprised a lot of people in Washington. And it faces some major hurdles before any of us see a dime. So, what does that journey to approval actually look like? Well, it has to go through the whole legislative gauntlet. You know how it is. Step 1 is done. The bill is officially introduced. But now comes the really tough part. It has to be debated, probably picked apart, and then eventually voted on.
And that right there is the biggest hurdle of all. For this to become law, it needs to get a yes vote in both the House of Representatives and the Senate. If it can somehow clear that massive obstacle, it then goes to the president's desk. And since it was his administration's idea, a signature is pretty much a given. But honestly, getting it through Congress is the real challenge here. So while all of that political maneuvering is going on, a completely different conversation is already heating up. Let's say it does get approved. A lot of people are asking a very simple but powerful question. Is $600 really enough to make a difference? And this has kicked off a pretty significant debate among analysts, experts, and just regular folks. This whole debate really boils down to two numbers. On one side, you have the official proposal for $600. But on the other, you have a pretty loud and growing group of people, analysts and citizens alike, arguing for a much bigger payment, something closer to the $2,000 checks we saw during the pandemic. Their point is simple. Given the kind of economic pressure we just talked about, $600 is just not enough to provide real, meaningful relief. And the argument for that bigger check ties directly back to where the money is coming from. The people pushing for $2,000 are pointing to the statements that the U.S. has brought in billions, maybe even trillions, in investments and tariff money. So their thinking is pretty straightforward. If all that money is sitting there, why isn't it possible to send out a much larger check to help Americans who are really struggling? And so that's where things stand today. We have a real concrete proposal for $600 that's just starting its journey through a very complicated political process. At the same time, a passionate debate is raging about whether that amount even begins to meet the needs of the moment. As this all moves forward, the central question is going to be, what amount will actually provide real relief to Americans feeling the pinch? We'll be watching this one closely.
All right, if you're one of the tens of millions of Americans who get Social Security, there's a new proposal making some serious waves that you really need to hear about. An advocacy group is pushing hard for a pretty significant one-time payment for everybody who gets benefits. So in this explainer, we're going to break down exactly what this proposal is, why it's even on the table right now, and what it could all mean for you.
So let's just cut right to the chase. The number at the very heart of this whole conversation is $1,400. Now, this isn't some new monthly increase or a tiny adjustment we see every year. Nope, this is a proposal for a single, direct payment. The whole point is to provide some immediate financial relief. It's a pretty big number, and it's meant to tackle a financial strain that, according to proponents, has been building up for years now.
So who would actually get this money? Well, the proposal isn't just for one small group. It's designed to cover absolutely everyone who receives Social Security benefits. That means retirees, of course, but it also includes folks on Supplemental Security Income, that's SSI, and Social Security Disability Insurance, or SSDI. The whole idea is to give a big, broad-based boost to all beneficiaries who are trying to make ends meet on these fixed incomes.
Okay, so why now? Why this big push for a $1,400 payment all of a sudden? Well, the answer really gets into a long-running debate over something called the COLA, the Cost of Living Adjustment. The people behind this payment argue at the system we're using right now to adjust benefits for inflation, well, they say it's fundamentally broken and that millions of people are falling further and further behind because of it.
Every year, Social Security benefits get a little bump, a percentage increase, to help people keep their buying power as the prices for, well, everything go up. That's the COLA. And in theory, it sounds like a perfect system, right? If your rent, your groceries, and your gas all get more expensive, your benefits should go up to match. But, and this is a big but, the core argument of this new proposal is that in the real world, it's just not working that way at all.
The main voice you're hearing behind this push is a nonpartisan group called the Senior Citizens League, or TSCL for short. For years, they've been making this case that the annual COLA increases are, to put it simply, just not enough. They argue there's this growing gap between the benefit increases people get in their checks and the actual real-world inflation they're facing, especially for the big things like housing, food, and of course, healthcare.
And this right here gets to the technical, kind of nerdy heart of the problem. See, the current COLA is calculated using something called the CPIW. It basically tracks the spending habits of younger, working-age people in cities. But critics, like the TSCL, say that's a huge flaw. Why? Because the spending habits of a 40-year-old office worker are completely different from a 75-year-old retiree. For example, seniors spend a much bigger chunk of their income on healthcare, a cost that the CPIW barely registers. So the TSCL wants to switch to the CPIE, which is based on the spending of the elderly. They say this would finally give a true picture of the inflation seniors are up against and lead to much fairer benefit increases.
And this quote from Shannon Benton, the executive director at TSCL, it really frames the whole issue perfectly. For years and years, beneficiaries have been saying, hey, my costs are going up way faster than my benefits. This quote flips the whole script. It says, instead of doubting the lived daily experience of millions of people on fixed incomes, maybe, just maybe, it's time to admit that the tool we're using to measure their costs is the thing that's actually broken.
So moving beyond all the technical arguments about inflation and indexes, what's the real-world evidence for this payment? Well, the TSCL has gathered some really compelling data that, honestly, paints a pretty stark picture of the financial pressures that millions of beneficiaries are dealing with right now, today.
Just let this number sink in for a minute. 7.3 million. According to the TSCL's research, that is how many American seniors are trying to get by on less than $1,000 a month. That's not just a low number, it's below the federal poverty line. And as the organization points out, in most cities, that's less than what you'd pay for just a modest apartment, let alone food, utilities, medicine, everything else. This is the reality that's fueling this urgent call for relief. And this dependency it's absolutely key to understanding the problem. For so many people, Social Security isn't just a little extra check to help out. It's their entire livelihood. This research shows that for nearly 4 out of every 10 beneficiaries, Social Security isn't just part of their income, it is 100% of their income. So when that's your only source of money, even a small gap between your benefit increases and the rising cost of living can be completely devastating. And when you look at the opinions of the beneficiaries themselves, the message is crystal clear. A survey by the TSCL found just overwhelming support for changing how the COLA is calculated. We're talking 96% in favor of using an index like the CPIE that actually reflects their spending. The survey also found that 1/5 of seniors are spending over $1,000 a month just on healthcare. And maybe the most telling part, 4 out of 5 felt that inflation was way higher than the official numbers the government was reporting. So this isn't just a policy debate, it's this widespread feeling of being left behind. Now, it's really important to understand that this whole idea of a direct payment isn't just coming out of thin air. There's actually a history of the federal government providing this exact kind of direct assistance. This $1,400 proposal is really part of a much bigger ongoing conversation about how we can strengthen Social Security benefits for everyone. If you look back, you can see some really clear examples. Back during the Great Recession in 2009, the government sent out $250 economic recovery payments to people on Social Security and SSI. And of course, much more recently, during the pandemic, millions of us got those economic impact payments, the stimulus checks. The TSCL points to these examples as proof that when things get economically uncertain, the government can and has stepped in with direct financial help. This new proposal fits right into that pattern. And this proposal for a one-time payment, it's not the only idea out there for boosting benefits. Not by a long shot. There have been several other pretty big plans discussed recently. For example, Senators Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren brought back the Social Security Expansion Act. That's a bill that would increase benefits by $2,400 a year, so $200 every month. And similarly, during his 2020 campaign, Joe Biden also proposed a $200 per month increase. This all just goes to show that the push for a $1,400 check is part of a much wider call from a lot of different people to provide more substantial support.
So with all of this context, you've got the flawed COLA, the real financial hardship, the history of these kinds of payments, and all these other proposals floating around, we finally get to the big question. We have this compelling proposal on the table, so what happens next? Where does this whole idea go from here?
Okay, this right here is the most important thing to clarify right now. The $1,400 catch-up payment is a proposal from the Senior Citizens League. It is not a bill sitting in Congress, and it is definitely not a law. It's an idea that's being pushed by a very influential advocacy group to spark a conversation and, frankly, to put some pressure on lawmakers. The goal is to get this concept onto the legislative agenda, but as of today, that's what it is, a proposal. So let's do a quick recap of the key takeaways from all this. First, a major advocacy group, the TSCL, is pushing for a one-time $1,400 payment. Second, this is a direct response to the cost of living adjustments that they say just haven't kept up with real-world inflation for seniors. Third, their case is backed up by some pretty stark data on financial hardship. And finally, this kind of direct payment isn't new. It has been used before during tough economic times.
And that leaves us with this final really crucial question. This $1,400 proposal, it's a potential short-term fix for a very long-term problem. And whether this specific plan ever moves forward or not, the underlying issues, how do we accurately measure inflation for seniors? How do we make sure benefits provide a dignified standard of living? Those questions aren't going away. It really forces all of us to think bigger. As our economy keeps changing, how does this fundamental pillar of our social safety net need to evolve right along with it?
So let's talk about something you've probably heard a lot about, this idea of giving every single person on Social Security an extra $200 a month. I mean, on the surface, it sounds amazing, right? A huge boost for millions of people. But, as we're about to find out, when you dig into the details, it gets a whole lot more complicated. All right, let's get into it.
This one quote really just sums up the whole thing perfectly. It's a plan that comes from a really good place, trying to help folks who depend on Social Security. But it's also got this giant, fundamental flaw that makes it, well, almost impossible to actually do. So the big question we're going to tackle here is, what's the good part? And what's the really, really flawed part? And maybe, just maybe, is there a better way to do it?
So, first things first, where did this idea even come from? Because it's not just some rumor bouncing around online. Nope, it actually comes from real legislative proposals that have been kicked around for years. Let's break down what this plan is really all about.
Okay, so this whole idea is a huge piece of something called the Social Security Expansion Act. Now, this act has a lot in it, but the part that gets all the headlines, the part everyone talks about, is that permanent $200 a month raise in benefits. And it's important to note this isn't some brand new idea. A temporary version was talked about back in 2020, but this proposal, this one wants to make that raise a permanent part of Social Security.
Now let's be super clear about what this means for an individual. That $200 every month adds up to an extra $2,400 over a year. I mean, for anyone on a fixed income, that is a life-changing amount of money. Seriously, that could be the difference between just scraping by and actually having some breathing room. And the big promise here is that everyone, every single person getting a Social Security check gets this money.
An extra $2,400 a year. Sounds great, doesn't it? But this right here is where we bump into the other half of that quote we started with, the massively flawed part. And it all boils down to one thing, the absolutely staggering cost of making that promise to everybody. When you start running the numbers, you see the real problem.
First, you have to wrap your head around just how massive the Social Security program is. We are talking about roughly 72.5 million people getting a check every month. And that's not just retirees. This includes people on disability, it includes survivors, it includes spouses. It's a huge, diverse group of Americans who count on that money.
Okay, so what happens when you multiply those 72.5 million people by an extra $200? The math is simple, but the answer is, well, it's pretty stunning. It would cost an extra $14.5 billion. And that's not for a year. That's every single month. That's an enormous new expense that has to be covered every 30 days.
And when you stretch that out over a full year, the true size of the price tag just hits you, $174 billion. Just to put that into perspective, the government's already paying out over $1.3 trillion a year in benefits. This would add another $174 billion on top of that, every single year. For a lot of lawmakers, that number stops the conversation cold, especially since the Social Security Trust Fund is already being used to cover current payments.
And this gets us to the real, logical heart of the issue. The cost is so huge because the plan is for everyone, no exceptions, which forces us to ask a really important question. Is this the smartest way to spend that money? Does the person getting the absolute maximum benefit need this raised just as badly as the person getting the absolute minimum?
And here it is. This is the big flaw, laid out for everyone to see. Under this plan, someone who is already getting, say, $4,000 a month from Social Security gets the exact same $200 raise as someone who is really struggling on less than $1,000 a month. Now, don't get me wrong, an extra $200 is nice for anybody, but it's not really needed by people at the top end of the scale, and that untargeted approach is what makes the plan so expensive, and frankly, what makes a lot of people say it just doesn't make sense.
So, if the give it to everyone plan is way too expensive and not very efficient, what's the alternative? Well, this is where the idea of targeting comes in. Instead of a blanket raise for all, what if we focus that money on the people who need it the most? Let's check out a couple of much more realistic options.
We can really break this down into two simple, logical ideas. The first one, let's call it the half plan, would give that $200 raise only to people whose monthly check is at or below the national average. Then there's a second, even more focused idea, the poverty line plan, which would send that money only to those whose benefits are so low that they're at or below the federal poverty line.
And right here, you can see just how dramatically the money changes when you start targeting it. The universal plan, we know, is for all 72.5 million people and costs $174 billion a year. But look at the half plan. By focusing on about half the people, around 36 million, the cost drops to about $85 billion. And then, with the poverty line plan, targeting the 12 million lowest income folks, the cost plummets to just $36 billion a year.
So this is the key takeaway. Just by being a little smarter about who gets the money, you can slash the cost of the whole thing. Moving to the half plan cuts the price tag by more than half. And going to the super targeted poverty line plan, that reduces the cost by almost 80%. All of a sudden, you're talking about numbers that are way, way more manageable, both financially and politically.
So all this brings us to the final, and let's be honest, probably the most important question. Could any of this actually happen? I mean, a plan is just a plan until it becomes a law. How would politicians in Washington actually look at these different proposals? Well, it really all comes down to the simple math of cost versus impact.
Look, if you walk into a lawmaker's office with a plan that costs $174 billion extra a year for a system that's already under strain, that conversation is probably going to be pretty short. They'll just say it's not going to happen. But if you walk in with a plan that costs $85 billion, or even better, $36 billion, and you can show that every single one of those dollars is going to the people struggling the most, well, that's a completely different conversation. That's a plan you can actually defend.
And that's the political reality of it, right? It's pretty easy to vote no on a massive, unfocused spending bill. It's a whole lot harder to stand up and vote against the plan specifically designed to lift 12 million of our most vulnerable seniors and disabled citizens out of poverty. The moral argument there is just so much more powerful, which makes that super targeted plan the most likely to ever get any real momentum.
So, we end up right back where we started. The idea of a $200 raise is a good one at its core, but giving it to everyone is a deeply flawed approach. The numbers don't lie, a targeted plan is just far more realistic and efficient. But that leaves us with one final big question. We have a logical path that could provide real, meaningful help to millions. The question is, in today's political world, is logic enough to actually get something done for the people who need it the most?
Today, we're diving deep into a topic that affects the financial planning of about 7.4 million Americans. The projected 2025 cost of living adjustment for your supplemental security income, or SSI benefits. We've got the first big piece of the puzzle, and we're going to break down exactly what it means, how it's all calculated, and what you can really expect in the months ahead. All right, let's jump right in. Okay, let's get straight to it. The number of the hour is 2.7%. Now, based on the very first piece of official inflation data that's come in, this is the current projection for the 2025 raise to your SSI benefits. For a little context, you might remember the raise for 2024 was 3.2%, so this first look is starting out just a little bit lower. But it's a number that has a huge impact on your monthly budget, so let's dig into what it actually means for you.
So this annual raise, it's officially called a COLA, which stands for Cost of Living Adjustment. And the whole point of the COLA is to make sure your benefits don't lose their power over time. I mean, think about it. When the price of everything, groceries, gas, utilities, when all that goes up, your income needs to adjust to keep up, right? Well, the COLA is the system designed to do exactly that, and it applies to every single person receiving SSI.
So what does a 2.7% raise actually look like in your bank account? Because a percentage is just kind of abstract until you turn it into actual dollars and cents. In this next part, we're going to get really specific and look at the hard numbers for both individuals and married couples, all based on this early projection. Okay, for an individual, the current maximum federal SSI payment is $967 a month. If we apply this projected 2.7% COLA, we're looking at a monthly increase of $26. That brings the new max up to $993. And what's really interesting here is just how close that is to that big psychological milestone, $1,000. It just makes you wonder, will the final numbers be enough to push it over the line? Now let's take a look at the numbers for married couples. When both partners are eligible, the current maximum is $1,450 a month. With that same 2.7% projection, that would mean a $39 increase, which would raise the new monthly benefit to $1,489. Again, these are the concrete dollar amounts we're looking at with the data we have right now. So, where does this 2.7% number actually come from? I mean, it's not just some arbitrary number they pull out of a hat. There's a very specific formula that the Social Security Administration has to use, and it's all based on very specific economic data. So let's pull back the curtain and see how the engine for this whole process really works. So, the heart of the calculation comes down to a specific government measure of inflation. It's called the Consumer Price Index for Urban Wage Earners. Yeah, it's a mouthful, so we just call it the CPIW. But here's the most important part. They don't use the inflation numbers from the whole year. The law specifically says the calculation uses only the average inflation from the third quarter of the year. That means just the data from July, August, and September.
And that is exactly why this is just a projection. It's kind of like we're trying to figure out the average temperature for the summer, but we only have the data for June. We have the inflation report for July. That's done. But we're still waiting for the August numbers, which we'll get in mid-September, and then the final piece of the puzzle from September, which comes in mid-October. Only when they can average all 3 of those months will we get the final official COLA.
This brings us to what is, without a doubt, the most important point in this entire explainer, and I really can't overstate this. All the figures we've been talking about, the 2.7%, the $26 increase, the $39 increase, they are all preliminary. They are not a promise, and they are almost certain to change.
Let me be as direct as I can here. None of this is guaranteed. These numbers will change. You see, even tiny little fluctuations in inflation during August and September can cause that final COLA to tick up or down. If an inflation report comes in hotter than expected, the raise could go higher. If a report comes in cooler, well, it could bring it down.
So just to recap the key reasons you have to be cautious, we're working with incomplete information here. The whole calculation is based on an average, and we only have one of the 3 numbers we need to figure out that average. The final official announcement won't come until October, after all 3 months of that third quarter inflation data have been collected and analyzed.
So given that this is all just a projection, what does this mean for your financial planning? And what should you be watching for? You know, understanding the context around these numbers is just as important as the numbers themselves.
Now, there's this disconnect that a lot of people feel, and it's a really important part of this whole conversation. The official inflation number, that CPIW, it might say one thing, but the reality at the grocery store or on your utility bill, well, that can feel very different. There's a really common feeling out there that the cost of essentials is going up much faster than the official data shows. So while the COLA is tied to that official number, this gap between the data and daily life is key to understanding the full picture.
So the crucial point and the main takeaway here is this: the game is not over. Not by a long shot. The most important events are still to come. Those inflation reports for August and September, those are the data points that will decide the final outcome. All eyes are going to be on those releases in the coming weeks because they are what will determine the actual raise that millions of SSI beneficiaries will see in their checks starting in January 2025.
And so we're left with this really tantalizing question. The projection for an individual is sitting at just $993 a month. It's hovering right below that major milestone. So the big question for the next couple of months is, will the inflation data for August and September provide just enough of a nudge to push that maximum benefit over the symbolic $1,000 mark? That's the key question we'll be watching, and we will be back with the answer as soon as those final numbers are in.
The 4th stimulus check. It's everywhere, right? And with all that talk comes a ton of questions, and honestly, a whole lot of confusion. Is this thing for real? How much are we even talking about? And the big one, when could you actually see that money? Well, today, we're going to cut through all that noise, we're going to lay out the facts so you know exactly what's what. And that brings us right to the single biggest question that is on literally everyone's mind. You see it in every comments section. When are we gonna get it? It's such an urgent question for so many people, so let's just tackle it head on, right now. You know, normally we might kind of build up the suspense, save the big reveal for later, but not today. We are going to answer this million-dollar question immediately because, frankly, it is the most important piece of this entire puzzle. And here it is, the most honest, the most accurate answer anyone can possibly give you right now. Ready? We don't know. Simple as that. Despite everything you might be seeing online, all the clickbait, all the promises, the truth is nobody knows for certain when or even if a new payment is actually going to get approved and sent out. And this is exactly why you have to be so careful. I mean it. If you see someone online, anyone, claiming they have a specific payment date, you should be extremely skeptical. Right now, any exact date is just pure guesswork because the wheels of government just haven't turned that far yet. Okay, so now that we've kind of set some realistic expectations about the timeline, let's get into what is actually on the table.
This isn't just some vague idea floating around in the ether. There is a real, concrete proposal out there with a specific name and everything. The official name is the American Worker Rebate Act of 2025. This is a real piece of legislation, a formal bill that was introduced in the Senate by Senator Josh Hawley. So it's not a rumor. Having a formal proposal is a huge deal because it means there's something tangible for lawmakers to actually debate, maybe amend, and hopefully vote on.
And this brings us to the number you've probably seen popping up everywhere, $600. Now, that's the base amount being proposed for each eligible person. But what's really fascinating here isn't just the number itself, it's where that money comes from and where that number could go.
So here's the really unique part of this proposal. The money for these checks would actually come from revenues collected through tariffs on foreign goods. The bill states the payment would be no less than $600. What that means is, if those tariff revenues start to grow, the final payment could actually go up. It's a floor, not a ceiling, which is a pretty interesting twist. You know, we get a ton of questions about who would get this. People are always asking, when will folks on SSDI get it? Or what about seniors? Well, this particular proposal is designed for the general population. It's not aimed at one specific group. So if it were to pass as it's written today, all eligible people would get their payment around the same time. Okay, so we've got a real proposal with some pretty specific details. But how does an idea like this go from a piece of paper to an actual law that results in a check in your bank account? Well, it has to navigate the very, very complex world of Congress. For a bill like this to actually become a law, there are really three main ways it can happen. Three paths it can take. First, it could pass all by itself as a standalone bill. That's pretty tough to do. The second option, and you see this happen in Washington all the time, is it gets tacked onto another much bigger piece of legislation, something that has to pass, like the federal budget. Or third, it could get ruled into what they call a reconciliation bill. That's a special kind of budget bill with rules that can, make it a little easier to get through. So when could all this happen? This timeline here lays out the key moments to watch for. Now, let me be super clear. These are not payment dates. Think of them more as opportunities, legislative windows, like that federal budget deadline or a reconciliation period. These are the moments when a proposal like this one could get attached to a bigger bill and actually start moving forward. So these are the times you'll want to pay attention. Whew, we have covered a lot. The what, the how, and the when, or I guess the when we just don't know. So let's pull this all together. Let's summarize the absolute most important things you need to take away from all this. Okay, let's just boil this down to the four key things. Number one, yes, a real proposal for a $600 plus check is really out there. Two, it has an official name, the American Worker Rebate Act. Three, the timeline is the biggest mystery of all. Nobody has a confirmed date for you. And four, there are these specific opportunities, these legislative windows in the next few months where this whole thing could be debated and maybe passed. So what does this all mean for you right now? Well, it really means we're in a waiting game. And I know, hearing be patient is not easy, especially when money is tight. But honestly, the best thing to do right now is to keep an eye out for official news. News that comes directly from the lawmakers who are actually working on this, not from some random online rumor. And that really leaves us with one last thing to think about. If you zoom out from this one specific bill, the fact that we're even still having these conversations is, well, it's pretty significant. The bigger question here is probably this. What does this whole ongoing debate about sending money directly to people tell us about the future of our economy, about how we approach financial support as a country? It's definitely something to chew on.
All right, listen up, because for millions of Americans, tomorrow is a really big deal. We're talking about those crucial Social Security payments that are about to hit bank accounts. So in this explainer, we're going to break down exactly what that means, not just for you, but for the whole economy. Okay, let's get right into it.
So what's the magic number everyone's talking about? It's this, $1,800. You're probably seeing this figure pop up, and for good reason. It's a huge financial moment for millions of people who have been, waiting on this.
Yep, you heard that right. The Social Security Administration has given the green light, and these average payments are scheduled to start rolling out tomorrow. And look, for so many families, this is not just another check. It's not just a date on the calendar. This is the money that literally keeps the lights on, puts food on the table. It's what pays for essential medications. It's that important.
Okay, let's pause for a second, because it's really important to understand what this number actually is. That $1,800 figure, that's the average monthly benefit for retirees. And the key word there is average. Your actual payment, the one you'll see, is totally tied to your own earnings history. So yeah, a lot of checks will be around that number, but some folks will get more and some will get less. It's personal.
So who's actually covered by this? Who's getting these payments? Well, we're talking about a pretty wide net of Americans. You've got retirees and seniors, obviously, folks who have paid into the system their entire working lives, but it also includes beneficiaries of Supplemental Security Income, that's SSI, and Social Security Disability Insurance, or SSDI.
Okay, this leads us to probably the biggest question on everyone's mind, right? When are you actually going to see that money in your account? It's not like the Social Security Administration just flips a switch and everyone gets paid at once. No, there's a very specific system they use. So how does this whole schedule work? It's actually pretty clever. For retirees and folks on SSDI, it's all based on your birthday. It's simple. If your birthday falls between the 1st and the 10th of the month, you'll get your payment in the 2nd week. If you were born between the 11th and the 20th, yours comes in the 3rd week. And for everyone else, the 21st through the 31st, you're looking at the 4th week of the month. It's just a way to manage the sheer volume of payments so everything goes smoothly. Oh, and for SSI, that's a little different. That usually comes right on the 1st of the month.
You know, we can talk about numbers and schedules all day, but behind all of that is a real human story. For millions and millions of Americans, this isn't just some monthly check. It's everything. It's their lifeline. This is money that people have earned, paid into the system for, and now they rely on it to live with some dignity.
And what exactly does that lifeline cover? Think about it. For a lot of people, every single penny of this check is already accounted for before it even shows up. It's immediately going to the absolute essentials. We're talking rent or mortgage, groceries, the power bill, and then you have the massive healthcare costs, prescription drugs, copays, insurance premiums. It's gone in a flash, but it's what keeps people going. And the story doesn't end there with just one household. This money creates this huge ripple effect. It's like the lifeblood for local communities. Think about it. That money is spent at the local grocery store, the corner pharmacy, landlords get their rent checks, which they use to pay their own bills, utility companies get paid, small businesses see customers walk through the door. I mean, in so many towns across the country, these payments are literally the backbone of the local economy.
But there's a catch. There's this tension that's been building for a while now. On one hand, yes, benefits get those annual cost of living adjustments, the COLA, you've heard of it, and that's supposed to help with inflation. But on the other hand, the reality for so many people is that it's just not enough. They'll tell you straight up, my check went up a little, but the price of everything I actually buy went up a lot more.
And one of the biggest culprits in this squeeze, it's healthcare. I mean, it's no secret. The cost of prescription drugs, doctor's visits, medical equipment, all of that stuff seems to skyrocket way faster than the general inflation rate. And if you're a senior or someone with a disability on a fixed income, that's a hit you just can't absorb easily. It takes a heavy, heavy toll.
Now, I want to be crystal clear about something. Tomorrow's checks are coming. They are guaranteed, so nobody needs to worry about that. But at the same time, we have to acknowledge the bigger conversation that's happening about the long-term future of the whole system. So while you can count on this payment, there's a major debate going on in Washington about how to make sure Social Security is just as secure for our kids and grandkids.
So, knowing all that, let's switch gears a little bit. Let's talk about what you can do right now. What are some practical steps you can take to get ready for your payment and just make sure everything goes off without a hitch?
Okay, here are 3 really simple things you can do. Step 1, just confirm your info. Log in or call and make sure your direct deposit details are up to date. Super easy, but super important. Step 2, plan out your budget. Know where that money is going before it even arrives. Cover the big things first: housing, food, healthcare. Everything else comes after. And step 3, if you can, and I know it's tough, try to save a little. Even a tiny amount, like $20 or $30 a month, can be a lifesaver when some unexpected bill pops up out of nowhere. So, as these checks land in bank accounts, they're bringing some much-needed relief and stability to millions of people right now. But it also forces us to look at the bigger picture, to ask that really important question. This payment is a lifeline today, for sure, but how do we, as a country, make sure that this system can provide that exact same stability, that same lifeline for generations to come? It's a question that really affects every single one of us.
Today, we are diving deep into a number that millions of you are waiting for. The very first official projection for the 2025 Social Security and SSI benefit increase. We're going to get into the exact dollars and cents, what it all means for your monthly planning, and, importantly, why this number is just the starting point.
Okay, let's just get right to it. The number you came here for, 2.7%. As of right now, this is the working projection for next year's cost of living adjustment, the COLA. This is the figure that's going to determine the raise for tens of millions of people in 2025. Now, you gotta understand, this isn't just some random number pulled out of thin air. This is our first real look based on actual official data at how much benefits are likely to go up next year. It's the first piece of the puzzle. So, you might be wondering, where in the world do they get 2.7%? Well, it's not a guess. There's a very specific and kind of particular formula they use. Let's pull back the curtain and look at exactly how this gets calculated. Okay, this is absolutely key. The COLA isn't based on the general inflation numbers you hear about on the news every night. Nope. It's tied to something very specific called the CPIW. Basically, it tracks what working folks are spending on things like gas, groceries, and housing. The entire COLA calculation lives and dies by the numbers from this one index. And here's how they use that CPIW. It all comes down to a 3-month window. The Social Security Administration only looks at the third quarter of the year. That's July, August, and September. They average the inflation from those 3 months to get the final number. Right now, we only have the data for July. That's what's giving us this 2.7% projection. The numbers for August and September are still to come, and they will make all the difference. All right, percentages are one thing, but what does this actually mean for your wallet, for your monthly check? Let's get into the dollars and cents, because that's what really counts for planning your budget, right? And you know what? You can actually figure this out for yourself right now. The math is super simple. Just grab your latest Social Security statement, take that monthly benefit amount you see, and multiply it by 0.027. That'll give you a really solid estimate of your potential monthly raise based on the info we have today. So let's put this into perspective with some real-world numbers. Take the average SSDI beneficiary. They're getting around $1,600 a month. A 2.7% COLA would mean an extra $43.20 in their pocket each month. Over a full year, that's more than $518. And what about the average retired worker? Well, their benefit is a bit higher, just over $2,000 a month. For them, we're talking about a $54 monthly increase. Annually, that adds up to an extra $648 to help with all those rising costs. But of course, you're not average, so let's get more specific. Okay, average doesn't apply to everyone, right? So we've put together these detailed charts so you can find your number. Just find your current benefit on the left. Let's say you get $800 a month. You're looking at about a $21 raise. If you're down at $1,300, that monthly increase grows to over $35. And you can see that yearly total, over $420 extra. And this chart just continues on for those of you with higher benefit amounts. If you're getting, say, $1,800, that's almost a $50 boost every single month. And if you're up at the $2,500 level, we're talking $6,750 a month, which is over $800 a year. The whole point here is to give you a really clear financial snapshot so you can start planning for 2025. Okay, let's shift gears for a minute and talk specifically about the 7.4 million folks who receive Supplemental Security Income, or SSI. Because this COLA affects you too. It directly impacts the maximum federal benefit rate. All right, let's break it down. For an individual on SSI, the current federal max is $943 a month. With this projected 2.7% increase, that would go up by $26. That brings the new projected total to $969 a month. So close to that $1,000 mark, but not quite there yet. And what about for a married couple, where both partners get SSI? Their current maximum is $1,415. That same 2.7% COLA would add about $38 to that, pushing their new projected monthly benefit up to $1,453 for 2025. Okay, I cannot stress this enough. If you take away one thing today, let it be this. That 2.7% number, it is almost certainly going to change. It's not the final answer. So let's talk about why. There's a big debate around this whole process. The source material we're looking at really questions whether these official inflation numbers actually capture what's happening on the ground. The feeling is, hey, the government might say inflation is down, but my grocery bill, my utility bill, they're telling a completely different story. That disconnect between the official statistic and your real-life expenses is a huge part of this conversation. And that really gets to the heart of why this number is just a starting point. Look, that 2.7% is based on just 1 month of data, July. We are still waiting for the numbers from August and September. The final COLA will be the average of all three. So if inflation suddenly spikes or drops in the next 2 months, that 2.7% will move right along with it. Everything really does hang in the balance. So what's the bottom line? We have a solid first projection, a really useful number you can use to start planning. But the final number is still very much a moving target. And that leaves us with the biggest question of all, doesn't it? No matter what that final COLA percentage ends up being, will it actually be enough to help millions of Americans on fixed incomes keep up with the real costs they face every single day? That's the question we'll all be watching. Let's talk about something that so many people wait for every single year, the Social Security raise. You know, it's that one number that's supposed to help you keep up with rising costs. But here's the thing. What if that headline number we all see isn't exactly the whole story? Let's dive in and unpack what that raise really means for your wallet. So the latest projections are out, and this is the magic number everyone's been talking about, a 2.8% cost of living adjustment. We call it the COLA. Now, on the surface, that seems pretty straightforward, right? It's a 2.8% boost to your monthly benefits. Simple. But, and this is the big but, how much of that raise will actually land in your bank account? That's the real question, isn't it? And the answer to that, well, it gets to the very heart of the financial reality for millions and millions of Americans. Okay, to really get what's going on, we need to take just a quick step back and look at why this annual raise even exists. I mean, it's not just some random bonus. It's designed to be a crucial financial lifeline. The whole idea behind the COLA is actually pretty simple. It's meant to make sure your benefits keep up with inflation. You know, as the price of gas, groceries, and everything else goes up, your check is supposed to go up too. The goal is that your purchasing power stays the same. At least, that's the theory. So how in the world did they figure out how much costs have gone up? Well, it all boils down to a very specific formula. And this, my friends, is where the first piece of our conundrum really starts to show up. They calculate the COLA using an index called the CPI-W. Now, the key part of that is right in the name, urban wage earners and clerical workers. Think about that. This formula tracks the spending habits of people who are still working, not retirees. And you know better than anyone that your expenses are totally different, especially when it comes to things like healthcare. And this right here, this is the result of using that metric over the long haul. Just look at that huge gap. Over the last 25 years, all the COLAs combined have raised benefits by 83%. But the actual costs that seniors face have skyrocketed by over 145%. That is a massive disconnect between the raise on paper and the reality of paying the bills. And that gap, it isn't just a number on a chart. It translates directly to this, a staggering 62% loss in purchasing power. To put it plainly, your Social Security benefits today by a whole lot less than they did a quarter of a century ago. Okay, so that's the big long-term picture. But let's bring it back to the here and now. What does this year's projected 2.8% raise actually mean for your monthly check? Let's talk real dollars and cents. Let's break it down. If you're currently getting, say, $1,000 a month, that 2.8% COLA works out to a gross increase of $28. For the average retiree who's getting closer to $2,000, that's about a $56 raise. Now, remember the word I'm using, gross. This is before anything else gets taken out. All right, so we can see the numbers. And for a lot of folks, even a modest increase is something tangible. But now we've got to talk about the big catch. This is the main reason why your net raise, what you actually get to spend, is almost always smaller than that big headline number. You see, there's another major cost that goes up every year for most of us, and its increase gets deducted directly from our Social Security checks. It basically eats into that COLA before we ever even get a chance to see it. So let's look at the other side of this equation. Take a look at this number, 11.6%. This single number represents the biggest headwind your COLA raises up against. It can pretty much wipe it out. So what is that 11.6%? That's the projected hike for next year's Medicare Part B premium. You know, that's the premium that covers your doctor visits, outpatient care, and for most people, it's automatically deducted right out of their Social Security payment every single month. And right here, this is the core of the whole problem, laid out plain and simple. Your benefits are set to go up by 2.8%, but your Medicare Part B premium is projected to jump by 11.6%. The cost of your healthcare is climbing more than 4 times faster than your benefit. It's a race your raise just can't win. In actual dollars, that 11.6% jump means the standard monthly premium is expected to go up by about $21.50. And again, that's the amount that gets taken out of your check before the rest of it ever gets to you. So let's bring this all together. Let's get to the bottom line. How can you figure out what your actual take-home increase is really going to be? It's a simple calculation, but wow, does it reveal the true impact of these two competing numbers? Here's how you can figure it out for yourself. It's super easy. First, you take your gross monthly raise from the COLA. Let's go back to our example of the $1,000 benefit. That was a $28 raise. Okay, step 2. Subtract that projected $2,150 Medicare premium increase. And what's the result? A net monthly raise of just $6.50. Your $28 raise just shrank to less than $7. And all of this brings us to one final, really critical question. The entire system is built on a promise, right? The promise to protect seniors from the rising cost of living. But if the adjustment itself is being eaten alive by the rising cost of healthcare, and the way we calculate it is totally out of sync with what seniors actually spend their money on, you have to ask, what part of this whole equation needs to change? So what would it really take for another round of stimulus checks to be sent out? It is, without a doubt, a question on millions of people's minds. And you know what? The answer might be a lot closer than you think. Today, we're going to cut through all the noise and look at the real, concrete economic signals that could actually trigger that next wave of support. Look, this is the question, right? It's probably one of the most common questions being asked right now. And if you're wondering about it, you are definitely not alone. The fact that so many people are even asking tells its own story. A lot of folks are feeling the financial squeeze. But to find the real answer, we can't just look at our own finances. We have to look somewhere else entirely.